Okay, hello everyone. Good evening. My name's Matt Pillischer, and welcome to tonight's conversation between comrades. We're excited as Poor People's Army to begin this series. I'm coming to you from Philadelphia, which is our headquarters. Poor People's Army's mission is to build a nonviolent army to keep people alive and to build a cooperative economy and society. And we've been around in different iterations for about 3 decades. First as Kensington Welfare Rights Union, then expanding nationally to Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign. And now we're known as that and Poor People's Army. And my role is I do a lot of educational work and communications, and we had this idea that we wanted to begin these conversations with different people we know and respect and trust their points of view, and um, and be able to talk about what's going on in the world and get different people's perspective. And so I thought almost immediately of Vanessa, and we are old friends and comrades, and it's been a while since we've caught up. So we're gonna pretend to have a casual conversation with a lot of voyeurs, but we'll try and ignore everyone until a little question and comment period. Um, but yeah, we'll have a conversation, and then probably around 8:35 or 8:40, we'll make sure to have time for questions, comments from people that are here, and we appreciate you all being here. Um, so Vanessa, as you might have read on the flyer, is a political philosopher, an ethicist, an educator, an activist, a professor based in Washington, D.C. She's associate professor of philosophy at George Washington University, and she has a book that recently came out, a monograph, Marx's Ethical Vision, and it's available at Oxford University Press. She's a founding editor of Spectre Journal, a biannual journal of Marxist theory, strategy, and analysis. So, welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you. I'm excited. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So, how are you? How's life? What are you doing besides being a professor and pulling your hair out about the world?
Not a whole lot.
Okay.
Not not a whole lot. I mean, I think like so many people, I'm my brain's sort of working overtime because I think we are for better, well, mostly for worse, um, in a period where things are changing so rapidly, and the political shape of US society, of course, is changing very, very rapidly and seemingly day by day. And, I think there's um, this obvious moment of flux where I am both drawing on existing frameworks and analyses and ways of thinking about the world. And also, I feel challenged and called upon to be very flexible in my thinking and open to the ways that a rapidly changing and transforming moment like this might call for revision of things I've thought or ways that I've functioned. So that's a lot of what's sort of going on in the background. In a day-to-day basis, I find myself working on like habits actually has been a real focus for me this year, just on a personal level. And I think that is again, like there's two things there. I think one is trying to put myself in a position to assimilate all this new information and respond to rapidly changing situations in as healthy a way as I can, and also a sad need to control something.
All
So that's what's going on over here.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair. there's more unhealthy ways to deal with it all.
Yeah, right.
That sounds good. Um, well, yeah, I mean, I we obviously want to dig into sort of what we think is going on now, and as people who've been longtime organizers and activists, how we function now, how we resist, how we build towards a better vision of the world. But I want to go back and talk about some basics. And so you're a professor of Marxism, well, professor of philosophy with, I guess, like a specialty in Marxism. So do you have like a basic definition of Marxism for your students or for the world?
I definitely have one for myself that guides me in my work. I mean, whenever I'm stuck or trying to organize my thoughts, I think that the most important guide, right? The sort of like, if I were to put in one sentence, is from a Marxist perspective and a historical materialist perspective, is to understand that human life is a human product, which can sound very glib and slogany. But when you start thinking about uh, the ways that we behave towards one another, the systems that we function within, class hierarchies, right? Even things that we're constantly taught are innate, like that human beings will always be selfish and mean and competitive. Just like stepping back to think about how everything that we see about how human beings are in the present day is a historically mediated product of human activity. And that changes a lot, I think. I mean, and it rules certain things out. It rules out, for example, that you think that people just have to be racist. It's just natural. That's just how we are. No, actually, that is a way of being that has been historically produced.
Mm.
There's lots of other things I could, of course, class analysis, very important. Dialectics, very important. But I think, in terms of just a very simple distillation of what the approach is, that
Uh,
that's a kind of touchstone for me.
and and in that it is a study of a process of change always, right? And I
Hmm.
guess that's like where dialectics can come in.
And importantly, of self-changing, right? I mean, so Marx will occasionally refer to labor as the activity of human self-changing. So again, that emphasis on on us being products of our own productive activity, our own creative activity. Absolutely.
So, how did you get into like the study of ethics, and how does that relate to Marxism?
So I'm smiling because I'm like, that's a really interesting question. I think I always was interested in, I mean, so what I know now and didn't know then is that I'm neurodivergent and I have ADHD. And like there's these interesting tendencies of like lots of neurodivergent people, and one of them is to be very justice
Yeah.
focused.
Yeah.
And I could kind of look back and see like, oh yeah, I always was like a little bit more concerned about these things. And but yeah, I mean, I think I'll also answer the question in terms of like how did I stay interested in ethics actually? Um, because ethics it can be sort of poo-pooed both by Marxists and by, oddly enough, certainly the sort of state of my own discipline in the early 2000s, there was like this sense that ethics is this unscientific, mushy thing that doesn't admit of the kind of science-like methodology that a lot of mainstream philosophy was attempting to imitate. I think some of that has shaken loose, but certainly at that time. But it was um, activism. It was especially the 2003 invasion of Iraq and my anti-war activism that led me back to the topic of ethics as a central concern because it just seemed wrong. It just seemed very wrong. And I could not understand why this wasn't obvious to everybody, especially since it was also not strategic, not such as to promote well-being, not, not any of these things that you would expect would be the case if we were to believe that such an intervention was advisable in any way. Um, and it just was a felt urgency that I had this commitment to anti-war work, and I wanted to think about it and to understand what I was doing and whether I was right, and that yeah, and that just that has I still wonder, I don't wonder that, but I still find these kinds of related questions, of course, um, important.
Hmm. So, can you talk about the Marxist theory of change and how Marxist revolutionaries think change happens?
Yeah. So I'll just I'm just gonna like talk about dialectics, and I'll start talking about it in a fairly formal way. But the notion of historicity is absolutely at the core of Marxist theory, and Marxists tend to think that um, Marxist analysis and theory are more historical than lots of rival theories. So this is something that really kind of animates and is part of what is thought to be distinctive about this. And um, the the sort of notion of like how history happens, how it is that events unfold, is borrowed in part from Hegel's conception of dialectics, and it's this notion that there are sort of contradictions, antagonisms of various kinds, and the sort of development of these antagonisms propels history forward, right? But is the sort of ongoing development of history, and you can and what happens, right, and how a system evolves depends in large part on which side of the antagonism wins out. So one of the clearest examples that Marx gives of that very kind of formal and abstract um, uh, set of things I just said is in the first lines of the Communist Manifesto, where he says that the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle, and that in each case there's a question of which class will win out. Um, or you could have the common ruin of the contending classes, as he puts it. Um, I just want to like caveat everything I say with like a real like sort of full conception of how change happens would be much longer.
Yeah.
So, but here are some of the kind of central ideas. Um, because a really important feature of Marx's theory of change, and one that I think doesn't get talked about enough, is the idea that all of human social being, right? So all of history, all of culture, of economics, right? That all of this um, is a unity, right? Is a single thing that can be studied as a whole. And that is a view that is often refused or often treated as hopelessly metaphysical and spooky and strange, right? I don't think it's any of those things, and it certainly is a key aspect of Marx's way of thinking about human beings as a species, because it's because he thinks of it as a whole, as a unity, that we can then talk about the kind of internal dynamics of the unity. So, one of the things that I say in my book is that one way to think about capitalism and why it is, for example, that only with the emergence of capitalism or bourgeois society, as Marx says, is it possible for Marx to write capital, right? Or for, possible to see that the working class is the class that has the capacity to transform society in such a way as to bring about human emancipation. Part of what it is about capitalism that allows that to be seen is its sort of globalizing tendency to draw people from all around the world into connections with one another, increasingly to resolve a class structure with lots of different classes into a kind of single battle between bourgeois and proletarian. And that sort of historical, increasingly um, high def, right, way of thinking about humanity as a totality in motion that can be studied as such is also part of what allows for the kind of philosophical, historical, and scientific insights that Marx takes himself to be making. I'm curious, Matt, since this is how did you get interested in activism? I actually want to know that. Like, how did that start?
Uh, well, it's interesting you brought up Iraq. I mean, for me, 9/11 was kind of like my what is going on? Why did this happen? So I was like, kind of fresh out of college, my early 20s, sort of default Democratic liberal because that's how I was raised, but didn't really, study the world that much. And I just was really like shook and started looking at what was going on, who were the people that attacked us, what was going on in that part of the Middle East, the history of US involvement in the Middle East, imperialism,
Hmm.
the war, like why okay, why are we going to the war with the right people? What is going on? And like so I got involved with the anti-war movement in the beginning of the Afghanistan war,
Hmm.
which was rough to be a part of
Yeah,
the war movement at that time because it was
it
so
was like hated.
so, 99% of the country, well, it felt like that was on board with, you know,
Mhm.
payback. Um, so it was through that and then the Iraq war and then I was living in Cincinnati at the time and I kept going to these, like Friday protests or whatever they did and ran into a group of socialists from the International Socialist Organization and sort of started talking to them, going to meetings and getting some sense of, oh, like this idea of Marxism of like there's a system of capitalism and class society at the root of a lot of these evils and oppressions and there's hope for a way forward. So that's how I got involved and then stayed involved and did a lot of work around race and racism and the the prison system and the criminal injustice system and
Created your excellent documentary Broken
yeah.
on All Sides, which I used for many years. Did I tell you that? Yeah, I used it for quite a while in my philosophy of race classes.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Hmm.
Yeah. So and stayed involved with different organizing work and tried to use film and propaganda to get the message out and so yeah, that's how I got involved. Actually, this might be an interesting moment to talk about film, and you raised like that some of your film theory classes in college
Yeah.
you think helped teach you how to process the world and relates to dialectics.
Yeah, I'm sort of like putting this together now, like
Yeah.
recently, like after having written the book.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Oh, really?
because yeah, like I didn't realize how important it has been in my thinking. And I think I'm only just now figuring it out. But um, because, my philosophical training has been mostly analytical, of course, like a style of philosophy that is not, they didn't teach me Marxism, right? Let's put it that way. At Princeton philosophy
Right.
program, they taught me lots of things, but not that. Um, and and then even with the kind of training that I got as an activist, um, they're not, ethics is a fairly understudied, theorized area of Marxist thought in general. And I'm like, well, I realized like it was going back and like sort of rereading the book,
Mhm.
um, that I realized that there's a kind of like logic of the book, a way that it unfolds, that I was like, this is most like film. Like this is most like and I started thinking about because I took a number of film theory classes as a undergraduate and then went on to also take film theory classes in graduate school. At the time, it was just something I was doing and was interested in, but um, I think, yeah, or I'm starting to think, I'm suspecting that a certain kind of like sense of a sense of like a period of time or a kind of moment or a set of relationships that functions as a whole with a kind of internal logic. That's something about that and the practice of interpreting a film in that way, like has helped my brain to be able to like think about all these different kinds of moving pieces in the because the book, like, it's not written like a typical, I mean, there's no like premise one is premise two, but yet I think it's very logical, and so anyway, yeah, so this is the kind of I was like, it'd be interesting to talk to Matt about this, and
Yeah.
just the ways that because I think we don't think enough about the ways that appreciating art
Mhm.
can help our theoretical work.
I mean, I see even in like the typical kind of classic hero's journey story, like where, well, first of all, it's always about like personal transformation in the end and overcoming, also some kind of world transformation. And so that feels very dialectical to me because like there's like some kind of seed of a thought or an idea or a challenge that's planted
Mhm,
in the main character,
mhm,
and it's the reaction always at first is like, ugh, like this is not, I'm not doing this, but
mhm,
it's now something, a part of their world that they have to deal with, and like then they try to rise to the occasion, and usually they're like beaten down, and like they have a couple losses, and then they like have some mentor figure that will come in and like help them and teach them. And I sort of think of that as almost like different pieces of a class forming and making a more united, cohesive sense of itself. And then defeating ultimately whatever it is, and like and personally, overcoming and transforming. And so like I think that's very similar to how Marxists think about like change happening, and the whole thing you
mhm,
talked about, contradictions and then an antagonism, and then
mhm,
there's poles, and they're a united thing, and then something has to win out once there's antagonism. Someone has to win, or maybe the whole thing is destroyed. So
Right.
that's I
Or if
never.
you think even of like capital, right, which is really a sort of like the career of a commodity and is even sort of told in this like let me tell like what is this thing? There's a there's a little bit of a sort of a ghost story going on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, actually, Will Roberts's Marx's Inferno argues that capital was very well may have been modeled on Dante's Inferno and has a kind of narrative structure in that
Oh,
way. And so, yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's just interesting. And I think, and I've been thinking about it more and wanted to share it because often I'm asked like, well, what was your training? Like where did you come from? Like how did you, what is it that you're drawing on? And I've been, and I've sort of had a story that's like, yeah, I had this analytic, philosophy education, and then something happened historically that education was not really helping me to understand but there's more to it. I mean, first of all, the analytic, and I think you see that in the book as well, like the analytic education that I got, like was pretty good. And, like did like there are a lot of tools there.
yeah.
It's just that I think, the best of it is upheld by Marxist theory, right? The rationality, science, argumentation, rigor, that actually it's Marxism that upholds these values best, I think. But also, yeah, also just like thinking back and piecing it together and thinking like actually there was much more, and especially my teacher Jeff Stout, who was a philosopher of religion and was in the religion department at Princeton, and I took courses including at least one of those film theory classes that I took was taught by him, and so I've been thinking more about the impact of American pragmatism because that was the tradition that he comes from, and it was part of my background as well. And although I'm not a pragmatist, that's sort of interest in what's happening on the ground, what's working, like um and especially the focus on thinking about community and relationships and people. Yeah, so
So coming back to making change, wanting to transform a society, which I think is why everyone's here. Like why all these heady concepts? Like why not
yeah.
just revolution? Why not just resist? Why not just, show up to every protest and eventually we're gonna win? Like is it
I can tell you exactly what happens if you show up to every protest for
I, I
for
think we did that
many
for a while.
years
Yeah.
at a stretch. It turns you get very tired. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing it now, right? The actually even better when we think about where our dear antagonist Donald left us in 2020, right? Um, it was, there were Black Lives Matter protests all across the country that spring. There was a massive rise in strike activity and workers' rebellions, on the shop floor. I was just, I just remembered recently and was reading, when police tried to commandeer city buses in Chicago and New
Yeah.
York to take prisoners to jail, to take protesters to jail. You had bus drivers saying, hell no, we're not doing it. I mean, there was a massive amount, actually, of pretty serious militancy and uprising. Um, it was all spontaneous. right? Or I shouldn't say it was all spontaneous, but it was largely spontaneous.
Mhm.
Um, and those, that sort of like uprising, like revolution, let's just do it now. Like love the energy, love the, like I love the way we're thinking here. And it's important, and I was very supportive of those protests and remain, very supportive. Um, but if it's merely spontaneous, it's very easily put down because the other side, the like capitalists are not real spontaneous when it comes to techniques of control, right? They think a lot about, do we have enough zip ties? Do we have enough, whatever it is, that the weaponry and technology of of violence, of putting down protest, and then all the way to, I would argue, um, uh, a lot of the legacy of the Biden administration was disorganizing, demobilizing, and discrediting those very movements, right? So you had Biden coming in and saying, no, don't defund the police, fund the police, right? Um, and we saw a resurgence of protest last year with the uh, pro-Palestine encampments. And I hear in the air like, well, how come people aren't protesting now? Where are those? So there are some protests emerging, I should say, but how come, where are those kids now? They're dealing with charges. They're fighting cases. Like, where do you think they are? They're dealing with administrations that are still trying to expel them, right?
Mhm.
Or they have literal criminal charges,
Mhm.
so um to sustain the kind of movement that we will, not even will, that we require urgently
Mhm.
yesterday, um is going to, it necessitates organization, base building, things like this event, and and the work that the Poor People's Army does. The it requires a lot, like even now, even with the stakes as high as they are, we need to take the time to educate ourselves um and to find the people that want to do something, and to work with them, right? Whether it's going to a protest, whether it's finding the people that are already active and asking, how can I be helpful? Um, Joining organizations like yours, right? Um, all of that has to happen because those that sort of spontaneous uprising, first of all, like it doesn't it's not self-sustaining, and it's easily put down, and it's not going to be equal to the task before us at this moment.
Mhm. I think it's also it's easily misdirected or co-opted, or the whole idea of controlled opposition, where there's definitely opposition that the rulers can live with because it lets off steam and it doesn't head them towards ultimate challenge of their power. And a lot of the um, spontaneous movements, I think, start with some really good energy and ideas, and then you see some of the same old voices and organizations swoop in and sort of try to take charge, or even newly formed, and then get some Walmart funds or some Ford
Right.
Foundation money, and like build up your organization, and it sort of turns it into a career rather than a revolutionary push,
That's true, but that's true. I should say that's true, and um, it's something I've been thinking about because um I mean, I think this is one of the things that the sort of current moment really pushes us to look at freshly because we're used to working in an environment where controlled opposition is treated as desirable by the elites, right? But that is treated as tolerable. And that doesn't actually seem to be the situation. I mean, like, so let me say more about what I mean by that. Um, the social programs like Medicaid, um, USAID abroad, um, they're taking over the Kennedy Center down the street, like sort of down the street from me. Um, there's just like everything that anything that was ever put in place by liberal wings of government
Mm.
with the intent, with lots of intent, right? But one of them, importantly, being to smooth over these class antagonisms, to mediate them in some way, and to make American society at least, you know, barely livable for the majority of human beings. Um, that's going out the window. Like, the idea the idea that that's, like, a good thing to do is going out the window. The idea that even appearing, anti-racist is something anybody should put effort into is going out the window. So, like, that now that doesn't mean, um that doesn't lessen the need for independent organizing, it heightens it. But I think it is one of like, I think we are seeing a transition into a much more bare knuckle, um, kind of capitalism.
That's one of
Uh,
the new
yeah,
qualities of the Trump administration compared to the past.
mhm.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
w and it's like, are we are we ready for it? Like, one of the things about that is that um it also, I think, creates a space for new alliances as well, or maybe better to say it this way. It it draws more people into awareness and struggle. Um, and unfortunately, like I don't like being right about stuff like that, but like this is the sort of thing that a Marxist analysis would predict, right? That the kind of this a period of sort of mediating and ameliorating and making more smooth and more manageable this contradiction between the interests of capital and the interests of people can only be temporary. And so it's a matter of time, right, that you see this kind of like open antagonism, open attack. Um, and one of the passages that I use in my book is uh, Marx says that you will see bourgeois law and order give way to lawless revenge. We're in the lawless revenge phase of capitalism right now and of capitalist justice. But that also means that lots of people, everybody from Medicaid recipients to Kennedy Center donors
mhm,
is pissed.
mhm,
And so that also opens possibilities for a broader array of people to fight back.
mhm, mhm. Um, I want to see if we have questions or comments. If anyone in the audience wants to say something, you can raise your hand. I don't think we've had a whole lot of stuff in the chat, but thanks for those who have. Um, I'll say on that vein, while we're seeing if anyone wants to ask any questions, some of the analysis that we have in Poor People's Army is like we're getting to the point where the ruling class is starting to be able to automate so much production that the reproduction of people of the working class is not
Mhm.
as important to them, and the sort of deterioration of the healthcare system, the schools,
Mhm.
all of the culture, anything that makes life, bearable for people that are were heavily exploited is not that. They're kind of like, well, screw them. We don't really need them anymore, and we think that that's some of the deterioration we're seeing. Uh, so yeah, I don't know if we could talk a little bit about that, but like the um, the sort of the historic take of a workers' revolution taking over the system is something interesting to think about when you see that more and more production is capable from computers and automation and robots, and that technology doesn't slow down or go backwards, it only progresses. And I think there's a whole section of the ruling class and its think tanks that are thinking of the future when not so much human labor is needed, and
Mhm.
um, structural homelessness, structural unemployment grows and grows and grows. And so part of our thinking is we're seeing the beginning of a new kind of fascism
Mhm.
to prepare for that, because they know that we have the numbers. I mean, we're all in
Mhm.
the same boat.
Mhm. Mhm.
And now it's amazing that even, doctors, lawyers, teachers are getting automated in some ways. It's so much of society that this impacts. And so the amount of surveillance ramping up, the targeting of people at the fringes now that we can, okay, let's get them to hate immigrants, let's get them to hate criminals, let's get them to hate
Mhm.
homeless people. And
Mhm.
that some of those ramping up of more fascist elements are ramping up for you and me, not
Mhm.
just those
Mhm.
elements.
Yeah, and thank you for using the F word. There's, like, all of this, so, like, in some sections of the left, there's been all these debates lately of, like, is it fascism? Is it just maybe it's just sparkling authoritarianism, okay, like, I don't want that either, so,
Yeah, right.
and I say this as, I don't, I say this as someone who has been teaching a graduate seminar on philosophy of fascism and anti-fascism for several years now. And the thing, anyone who familiarizes themselves with the literature among historians on fascism will not leave with the impression that there's some neat set of necessary and sufficient conditions such that you can hold up a chart and say, now look, we haven't gotten to stage B. That's not This is not how the concept works. This is not how the concept works. Um, but here's what I do know. I in so I was living in Germany in 2019, and I got back to the US in, like, I think it was like February 2nd or something of 2020. And the last thing I did on the last day before coming back to the US was to visit Dachau, the memorial of the concentration camp there. And it was so striking. You see that the first thing they did when they took these people in was size them up and see what could be extracted from them. What could be extracted? How much can this one work? How many gold teeth does that one have? What is that? It was all like just the complete dehumanizing reduction of people to capital. What can I get out of this person? Pure instrumentality. And then when I came back to the US and COVID hit, it was all, oh, don't worry, it's just a bunch of old people and disabled people that are gonna get sick and die. And I was like, this is the logic of the camp. Like this is like, you had the was it the governor down in Texas saying, well, we're just going to have to sacrifice some lives for the economy. And this really is like the it is such an like a distilled version of the perversion of capitalism that Marx is railing against, namely the valorization of empty abstract value and accumulation above concrete living human beings. And that is, that like um fascism is a tool of extraction. It is a technique of extraction. It is a technique of just absolute brutal reduction of human beings to instruments for private accumulation of capital. And that's clearly what we're seeing. When you tear down every social piece of the social net that people rely upon. When Musk is calling waste and fraud every time you or I drink clean water or eat food that hasn't been poisoned, um, what are we supposed to call that?
Hmm.
Oh, I see some questions.
Yeah, Nick, can you
Yeah,
read
I'm
through
gonna
these?
read these questions real quick. Some of them you spoke to a little bit. Feel free to expand on it, or go to these other ones. But from NECA, uh, question around, how they continue to extract wealth when there's nothing left to take, in regards to the ruling class, and us being superfluous. I can never say that word, to the economy. And Neck also said the system needs people to sell things in order to continue to grow. If human labor is eliminated, how will they be able to actualize
Mhm.
value in the equation Marx lays out? Mark here says there's a Marxist analysis between the difference of mobilize. Is there a Marxist analysis between the difference of mobilization and organization? I'm just going to read all these and then y'all can
Mhm.
we can discuss. Um, Question for Vanessa from June. How much do you see automation discussed these days in academic Marxism? What do you see Marxist scholars saying about it?
Mhm.
Um, and a good comment from Johnny Good Times. I'm not a Marxist, but I think there are a lot of people like me realizing the Democratic Party is helpless and hopeless. How much of your beliefs are all or nothing,
Mhm.
Marxism or bust, and how much of it is more malleable? Like, how can people with a variety of backgrounds and beliefs work together to fight what I think is honestly evil, Trumpism, and how can we most effectively work together even if we don't agree 100%?
Mhm.
Hmm.
And then I see Mel's question, which seems similar to Johnny's as well. Can there be a combination of Marxism and liberalism? So I'll speak first to NECA's question because I mean, they're all really great questions. And I, so here's my answer. And I don't know how satisfying it will be, but I do think it's true and important. If I had more time, I would work hard to convince everyone of it. But I think like capitalism and capitalists and their way of thinking about the world is irrational, is deeply irrational, right? These people, they don't know what we know. They don't know, right, that that their wealth and power, and that they don't understand that these things are socially mediated. They don't know that capital is a social relation between them and us. They think capital is stuff.
Mm.
And so they just want all the stuff. And that's as much as they think about it. And they're hoping that automation will allow them to enjoy their stuff and get rid of the people. But they don't have our analysis of what capital is as a social power in the first place to begin with. The other thing that is irrational about them is they don't really see the difference between robots and people. I don't think they really see the I don't believe that Musk sees the difference between a robot and his housekeeper. He doesn't know what a human being is.
Mm.
And so some of the things that they like, and I think it goes to an error that is very easy for all of us to make, that capitalism has a definite plan, and that it's a good one, and that it's actually going to help them to achieve their goals. But part of the absolute wackiness of this kind of far right, fascistic, extreme perspective is that it is wacky and it is irrational, and they can't actually do the thing that they think they want to do. Um, the, AI, like they've got so long before all the water is, like, I mean, maybe they'll figure this out, of course, but I think that's, anyway, I just want to say, like, I think it's important, like, yeah, no, they're not going to be able to do the thing that they want to do, but they can do a pretty good job of destroying the earth and killing a lot of human beings in the attempt. And so I think that is, um, that's what I would want to say about it, right? Um, and the, yeah, I want to take Johnny's and Mel's questions together, because, yeah, how much of your beliefs are all or nothing, Marxism or bust? Um, so, and I believe a combination of Marxism and liberalism. So I really do think that at the end of the day, we either achieve a world based on communal social control of the resources that human beings need, where our labor is organized rationally, where people have the capacity to um, have much greater capacity to organize their own lives, to make decisions for themselves, to have existences that are shaped by their desires and talents, that the world's resources are developed in order to promote the well-being of human beings rather than the well-being of human beings totally subordinated to capital and private accumulation. Um, I do think that either we move towards that and achieve it, or we're fucked. So, like, not to put too fine a point on it, but I do think that. Um, so if by Marxism or bust one means that thing that I just said, I do actually think that. Um, but if by Marxism or bust one means either you're a Marxist or I'm not going to talk to you, we can't organize together, you're my enemy, right? Absolutely not. first of all, I don't have the luxury because there's like 5 Marxists, you know?
They're all on this
You
call.
know, and I'm trying to build a mass movement, right? So first of all, I don't have the luxury.
Yeah.
But second of all, you know, it's only like, you know, Matt led the conversation talking about change and development. I believe, I believe that if you're looking around at what's happening in the world and you're starting to say to yourself, you know, I don't think these Democrats have a plan. I don't think they're the way. That means your consciousness is changing, right, in response to events. Um, and I believe, you know, that the more that people get involved, you know, do activist work, even expand the kinds of media that you're looking at, um, even you know, just like have conversations with different people. You know, because I think I am right, you know, I suspect that people who do that are likely to move closer and closer to my views anyway, right? And so there's nothing to gain from pushing people out of the movement, right? From like pushing people away. Um, you know, I want to be working with people who are thinking and questioning and looking for answers and willing to find them in new places. That's great. That's amazing, right? Um, and so no, I don't think I would not say Marxism or bust if what it means is like either you know, you're a card carrying red or a class enemy or something. Um, and yeah, that question of like, how can people with variety of backgrounds and beliefs work together to fight? So it's interesting, like that, like I was talking about um, my like early education in college, and this was always one of the things that really interested me was how can people with totally different sets of values potentially talk to one another and work together. And I think the working together actually helps produce the shared perspective. When you're in a situation, when you're on a picket line together, when you're at a protest together, when you're fighting for higher wages together, you're in those circumstances together. You see everything that's happening together. Um, you have to collaborate and think together about how to meet the challenge. And that is the um, concrete, on the ground, practical work that then helps to produce a shared perspective on the thing. It's like being in a relationship that's going well, not a bad one, right? But a good relationship where after enough time, kind of experiencing life together and responding to it together, you start to develop a kind of shared perspective. But imagine that, you know, on the level of the species. By the way, that's what I think objectivity is, but that's a whole other story, right? But it's something that is produced through our activity. And so it's very important to draw people into collaboration and mutual struggle against the material forces that imperil all of us. Um, and I want to give something like that answer to Marxism and liberalism, right? Because you know, I'm not a liberal, but you know, people mean all sorts of things when they call themselves liberals too, right? And lots of those things are, um, you know, most people in the US, certainly, because of the way we use that word here, when people say that people call themselves liberals, they usually mean things like, I believe in freedom, real freedom, right? I believe people should be able to live free as, I think trans people should have rights. I think children should have breakfast. I think oftentimes when people call themselves liberal, that's what they mean. And so absolutely, I think I know that there's lots of opportunity for overlap and interaction and working together, which we desperately need. And did I miss a question? I can't. I think we talked. Oh, automation. Um, I mean, so there's it's interesting. Automation, I will say, is not one of my specialties. So I don't know as much about the sort of state of the art. Um, I know, for example, my colleague at Spectre, Holly Lewis, has been doing really interesting work on AI in particular. And I mean, this is a couple years ago now, but there's work on what's sort of humorously called, like, fully automated luxury communism, right? Um, and Yeah, I can't venture an answer about what the actual state of the art is on that particular kind of subfield because it's just not my specialty. But thank you for the question, because next time someone asks me that, I'm gonna have a better answer for them. Thank you.
Um, I know that we're gonna try and wrap things up soon. But just wanted to say a couple more things and then have sort of closing. Um, I think Vanessa addressed a lot of the questions in a really good way. We didn't even get into talking about like how do you build class unity and sort of the problems among a lot of the radical left in sort of being like, well, the way we build unity is you think exactly like me, and if you don't, then we'll start our own group, I mean, or working with people that have completely contradictory views in some cases to you, but are willing to fight with you on one thing.
Mhm, mhm,
Sort of the way we have to accept that people need to grow in many ways to become the force we need to really massively change society. And if we're not going to work with people and helping them change or planting the seeds or being patient with them, then we're not going to win. And I think that's a whole nother interesting topic. And you
Oh,
know,
sorry. Can I just like jump in real quick? Because
yeah,
I just want to like put like a big underline there and like highlight it in red, because it's one of the things that I find most frustrating in this current moment is seeing like leftists and leftist tendencies and leftist groups like kind of like argue with one another about like this or that, like fine. And I'm just like, look around. There is, I mean, there's a real danger of defeatism, not just on the left, I think for liberals as well, for a large swath of us. There's a real danger of defeatism, but the fact that people are radicalizing, they are. People are, because more and more, I hear more and more and more and more people are saying, wait a second, I don't think the Democrats have a plan. We need to organize independently. Are looking at the sort and are seeing that American democracy is not at all what it has been held up to be. Like, so I teach and live in Washington, D.C. And if you walk around, you look at those monuments, right? Everything is designed to um, communicate solidity and permanence and tradition, and it's been this way. And it turns out one fool with a wrecking ball can just like knock over all these institutions that are clearly hollowed out and rotten. right? And so I think people are really having their minds blown, like, wait, none of this is what I thought it was. Um, and that is an opportunity to go out and talk to people that we haven't spoken to before, or who haven't known it, who didn't know that, because there's a whole structure that reinforces the idea that this is a democracy and it is, like, it's not just made up, and and all that stuff. So yeah, anyway, that's my highlight around
Yeah, yeah.
your warning. Yeah.
And I think, so I think the task of us, what Poor People's Army is trying to do, what we're trying to do with all these Zooms, and tomorrow we're heading to New England to do some in-person meetings, is like gathering the forces that are around us, trying to get on the same page, and then outreach to anyone that's willing to listen, and being sort of conscious of who's moving. And it's going to be different segments of the population, and for different reasons. But going back to the idea of Marxism, like he the theory is that capitalism creates its own gravediggers, like that the huge exploited working class will eventually see its power, and that it produces all wealth. Why shouldn't it just have
Mhm,
all the wealth and control all the wealth?
mhm,
And I think that with automation, it's a similar thing. Like, and you were saying it, like capitalism isn't like one brain. It's not that smart. It's like, and some of it is spontaneous. So like
mhm,
new tools being created is another sort of aspects of, I think, grave digging, is like, okay, now you're messing with the theory of value itself. If computers and robots are starting to make things, and we based all value on human labor, like there's an interesting kind of destruction of value going on right now. Um, and at the same time, like they are smart in that, what are they going after concretely? They're buying housing stock, they're buying land in huge
mhm,
amounts, they're trying to own the water. And so I think there is this sense that we're heading towards some kind of cliff, and I think
mhm,
people in our bones on our class feel that, and the ruling class knows that in some way. They're not quite sure what it is, but they're trying to get their hands on police, surveillance, land, houses. Like, what can we hold on to that has power, even if capitalism is ending, even if private property is changing as we know it? And so I think it does provide tremendous opportunity, because more and more of us are in the same boat, and it's really cutting across race and professions in a way that it hasn't happened before. And not to mention that, well, wow, with all this automation, we could have lives of luxury. We could have 3D printed houses and 3D printed livers, and I mean, it's just insane what's
yeah.
possible, but we don't control it, so we can't have it. So,
Mhm,
yeah, I just wanted to sort of echo some of what you said, and then tie in some of the other
mhm, mhm.
analysis. So I thank you all for being here. I want to have another conversation with you, Vanessa, and
Yeah, I'd love that.
yeah,
Yeah, and I'm sorry. There's questions that we weren't able to get to, but I know we're going over. And yeah, this was thank you so much for this conversation, Matt. It was great to see you even in two dimensions. And to talk. I mean, Matt doing activism together. So it's always lovely to talk strategy and politics. And I was asked if folks can email me, and absolutely. And actually, I'll put it in the chat. But also, my email address is on the contact page of my website as well. And it's vcwills@gwu.edu.
and this video will be available on Poor People's Army YouTube page at some point soon, and we'll post it to social media and send a link out to you all to share. So hopefully this is just the beginning of the conversation, and especially for everyone who showed up in the audience and has questions and thoughts and were provoked and want to, be thinking about these things long after this talk. Hopefully we can keep talking about them and find ways. So contact us if you have questions, and we will see you soon on the next conversations with between comrades. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for coming out. When Matt told me how many people registered, I was like, that's great, like on a Thursday night. So thank you so much for your time. I mean, this is really a lot of fun for me to do, and I think really important. So I really appreciate that you made time to join us.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.